Aw, nuts to this.
Lifeforce scared the total and utter living shit out of me when I first saw it back in 1986 or 1987. I was but a small child of 11 or 12 at the time when I came across this flick on TV. Back then, the two main UHF stations in town would air movies all day Saturday from noon until 6 p.m. A lot of times, these were rated R horror movies or sci-fi movies wherein the only thing they edited out was the bad language and the nudity, meaning scenes of heavy violence, blood, and psychological torture were all left in. Viewing Lifeforce at this age affected me deeply, and I remembered it vividly my whole life. In fact, even though I only saw it that one time way back when, I thought I could recall every story beat and even quite a bit of dialogue in this movie some 30 years later. So with these youngster memories in my brain, I decided to finally sit down and rewatch Lifeforce with a new perspective, that of a quasi-adult, and see if it holds up to my recollections of terror and disgust that I had when I first witnessed it. I will start off by saying, no, it does not hold up. Not at all. Not even in the slightest bit. I laughed at this supposed to be sci-fi horror movie the whole way through the second viewing. Don't get me wrong, the special effects are all decent enough. They falter a bit here and there, but they're on par with most of the other stuff that came out at around the same time. But the whole thing is just so goddamn silly, and so much of the narrative makes absolutely zero sense. But whatever, let me talk about the background of the movie first. The tagline of the flick is, "In the blink of an eye, the terror begins." That is true, but probably not for the reasons that the creators had hoped for. Based on the book The Space Vampires by Colin Wilson, Lifeforce was funded by Cannon Films and directed by Tobe Hooper of Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Poltergeist fame. Tobe was a horror aficionado who mostly dealt with low-budget movies in which he had to scrape through production, which led to some pretty decent entries into the genre. It's a not well-kept secret that Poltergeist was pretty much ghost-directed, get it, by Spielberg due to Hooper being way out of his depth on the large-budgeted production. So anyway, based on his previous works at the time, Cannon Films gave Hooper free rein on the $25 million production for this new sci-fi horror movie, The Space Vampires, whose title was sadly changed to Lifeforce pretty early on. Hooper went way over budget due to the studio not keeping tabs on the production, and filming went on for over a month past its initial estimates. Some reports by the crew and even the actors, like an interview with Bill Malin, who was one of the space vampires in the flick, say that filming was actually shut down at one point due to the studio running out of money already funding the movie. In the end, the movie had a bunch of last-minute edits. 15 full minutes were cut from the international version for the US's theatrical release, and music scores removed and added to it for its US release, and it was just crapped out into theaters in the summer of 1985. When Lifeforce opened in the US, it had no major advertising push behind it, despite its rather large budget at the time. It opened on the same weekend as a smash hit Cocoon, and it soon dropped into obscurity due to its negative reviews and terrible box office performance. I had seen some of the few ads for it that actually did air on TV, though, and thought it looked really cool. My 10-year-old brain didn't realize that because it was rated R and a horror movie, I would probably not be able to see it in the theater. So skip forward a year or two, and one Saturday afternoon when my friends were all busy, I saw that Lifeforce was going to be on channel 36, or whatever station it was, at 2 o'clock. I made myself a bag of popcorn, sat on the edge of my bed, and watched things unfold on my 13-inch TV in my bedroom, hoping for something awesome to dazzle my fragile little mind. I remember thinking that the movie was amazing. I thought that the story was thought-provoking, deep, and really creepy. The special effects were amazing, and the main space vampire chick, played by one Matilda May, was so hot, even with the editing used to keep all full frontal nudity blocked from airing. And there was a lot of full frontal in this movie. I went to school the following Monday and remember telling all the kids in my class about it. Nobody else had seen it due to either a lack of caring about it or not knowing it was even on. I then explained the basic outline of the story and characters with a heavy emphasis on Miss May's ample role. They were all hooked. It wasn't until the following Monday when I got an earful from a few classmates who begged their parents to rent them the movie for the weekend. What I never bothered to tell them, and they failed to ask, was that it was a rated R movie. Pretty hard R. Some parents were responsible and checked out the rating prior to just renting for their tween. Some just rented it and let their kids watch it without giving two shits, but at least two set of parents rented the movie for my classmates and then sat down and watched it with them. That must have been uncomfortable for my friends, what with all the violence, horrific images, and most especially the epic nudity. I'm pretty sure that they got in big trouble for begging to see the dirty, dirty movie from their parents that weekend, but that really didn't affect me in any major way, so whatever. On to the review. Things start off in 1986 when Halley's Comet comes back around again to complete its 75-year journey around the Sun. A space shuttle mission on board the nuclear-powered Space Shuttle Churchill, crewed by mostly British astronauts, would that be astronauts, is taking place wherein the crew is being sent to check out the comet for reasons that they never ever clearly state. Oh, and this is no ordinary British/American space shuttle. Oh no, the Churchill is apparently the size of the Chrysler building for no apparent reason, what with its enormous solar panels that it can fold up and store in its hold, along with how much room there is inside its living quarters that we can see. Oh, and it has artificial gravity because science. And I'm guessing because of the special effects budget that doesn't include too much zero-G screen time. But I digress.
Oh, take off, you hoser!
Anyway, so these astronauts fly out to the comet and find a 150-mile-long spaceship trapped or hitching a ride in the comet's coma, and they decide to check it out. I mean, they're already there. Being brave space explorers, they enter the enormous half-organic ship and find a shit ton of dead, man-sized space bats just floating around. Ominous. Along with 3 sexy, naked human-looking beings. Jackpot, who all appear to be in suspended animation in some weird crystal-like cocoons. Being the horny scientists that they are, who haven't seen naked perfect specimens of beauty like the magnificent Matilda May in over 6 months, they take the new people cocoons with them when they head back to the Churchill and then quickly return to Earth, even though they've spent a full half year just to get to the comet and did jack shit once they got there. If you've ever seen a horror movie before, you know that they just signed their death warrants. So, a month later, the shuttle arrives back at Earth. I chalked up the shuttle's return trip only taking 1/6 the time it took to get to the comet to science and stuff I couldn't understand, as opposed to bad scripting that was never corrected. And it's running completely silent, with only the autopilot locking it into a safe orbit around the planet. The US sends up another shuttle whose crew finds that the inside of the Churchill has been gutted by fire, with all the crew's bodies looking like dried up and charred mummies, and only the 3 crystal cocoon space humanoids left unscathed, still in hibernation, and still looking oh so perfect. And apparently they can't count or simply don't care that there's a missing astronaut body and that the escape pod has been launched. Escape pod on the space shuttle? Okay. But who cares? Hot naked space people in crystal cocoons. Woohoo! So the brilliant Earth scientists take the cocoon people back to the European Space Research Center located in central London, where the naked female alien, whom I will refer to as Matilda or Miss May from now on, comes back to life and sucks the essence of being out of the poor schmuck ordered to watch her comatose body, turning him into a creepy as fuck looking shriveled up mummy of a man, dead for all intents and purposes. Then she shares a kiss with a researcher who we think will be important to the plot from now on, only to find that he and his connection to Matilda is quickly ignored for the sake of bringing back the main astronaut who originally found the space girl on her spaceship, one Colonel what's-his-face. I don't remember anyone's name in this thing and barely care enough to even recall their roles. Matilda then simply walks out of the research center, still lusciously naked, by giving the guards at the door a static electricity shock after rubbing her feet on the carpet, and the scientists then start an autopsy on the body of the drained schmuck, only to find that exactly 2 hours, 2 Earth hours, precisely after he was killed, he pops back to life and then violently drinks the Lifeforce out of one of the doctors working on him, restoring the goober to his full fleshy form. The scientists and the military men who witnessed this quite disturbing act of soul-sucking come to the conclusion that they're dealing with space vampires, who probably came to Earth in a previous era on the tail of Halley's Comet, which led to our world's vampiric folklore. Sure, why not? And that they're going to set in motion a pandemic of human vampires if we don't get a move on! Let me take a pause here and explain how this vampirism works, at least in the early part of this film. It's so stupid and convoluted. So a space vampire, like the sexy Matilda, will drain the life force out of a human victim. That victim will then dry up into a corpse husk for 2 hours, 2 hours precisely, but then wake up and need to feed itself. But the corpse husks only have a window of 30 seconds in which to find another victim. If the corpse husk doesn't feed within that time frame, it crumbles away into dust. That's it. 30 seconds. We see it happen 3 times so that we are sure of the process of this timed event. How in the hell could this thing spread beyond 3 or 4 people with that small window of activity, especially when the mummy corpses are so insanely, disturbingly creepy to the point where who the hell would want to go near them? But back to the synopsis. Turns out that Colonel What's-His-Face survived the space vampires on the Churchill after setting fire to the shuttle himself in the hopes of escaping Miss May's influence. She, of course, made him her bitch aboard the shuttle on its 1-month return voyage, and then he took the solitary single-seat escape pod and landed it in Texas. Then, the Brits wait until he travels to London to ask him, what the hell happened up there, man? I mean, Miss May now has at least a half a day's lead on them. Geez, guys, isn't this something you could have asked him on the phone? It turns out that Colonel What's-His-Face has a telepathic link to the sexy space vampire because reasons, and so he is called back into action. Along with some British colonel in the Special Air Services, What's-His-Face starts to hunt down our poor Matilda across the English countryside. They track Matilda to some hot redhead who works as a nurse in an insane asylum. Colonel What's-His-Face, who can ESP into the nurse's mind a bit due to their shared connection with Miss May, then starts to beat the girl up with one of the fucking funniest lines ever spoken aloud in a movie in order to explain why a grown astronaut would ever put the smackdown on a petite red-headed Englishwoman. He needs to gather information from her about the vampire's next victim or current location, and he turns and says to Colonel SAS while shaking the girl like a British nanny, and I quote, "She's resisting. I'm going to have to force her to tell me. Despite appearances, this woman is a masochist, an extreme masochist. She wants me to force the name out of her. She wants me to hurt her. I can see the images in her mind. You want to stay? Otherwise, wait outside." To which Colonel SAS replies, "Not at all. I'm a natural voyeur." Then he nonchalantly settles into a comfy chair to watch the stripping and the beating of the poor woman. I had to rewind that scene several times on the second viewing. First of all, because I was laughing too hard and missed some of the dialogue, and secondly, because I wasn't sure I heard it all correctly. But yes, that exchange, as well as the ripping off of the nurse's dress and then slapping her around, did in fact happen. The nurse, who was in fact magically possessed by Matilda somehow, which again is never explained, but at this point, fuck it, remembers the face of an inmate at the asylum. So then the colonels just leave her and meet up with the head of the asylum, played by Sir Patrick Stewart, in a role he'd rather block from the IMDb, I am sure. Well, it turns out that Miss May is inside Patrick Stewart and not the psychotic inmate who they were told about. Oh no! Wait, this is actually no big deal since the two colonels restrain Sir Patrick quite easily, dope him up with 4 times the recommended dosage for some hypnotic drug that they have lying around, beat the shit out of him while trying to talk to Matilda through him, kiss the poor schmuck, have the room turned into the end battle of Willow in Bavmorda's tower, and then load him into a helicopter which flies them all back to the European Space Research Center in London. But oh no, it's for real this time when en route, our heroes find out that London has been turned into the 7th level of hell since they've been gone. Only 8 hours earlier, seeing as one of the remaining space aliens had escaped captivity and apparently turned the entire city into his vampiric legion. Then Sir Patrick Stewart wakes up from the mickey they slipped him, and then he pukes out blood all over the inside of the chopper, which then coalesces back into the sexy body of Matilda again. Yay! The best part of the movie is back. Then Matilda jumps out of the helicopter and joins her space vampire buddy in the city below for a bloodbath orgy. The two colonels then find themselves in an army-controlled quarantine base that has already contained the entire city of London in less than half a day. Good job, British forces. But they easily escape in order to head back into the city and end the shit once and for all. Okay, I take back my gold star. British forces, that was just sloppy. During this time, we find out that NATO is going to nuke London in 3 hours' time, and that a vampire spaceship has left Halley's Comet and parked itself in stationary geosynchronous orbit above the city, and that the glowing blue souls of all the poor schlubs drained by the vampires are all getting sucked up into the ship. But never mind trying to nuke that. Blow up London. Sure, fine, whatever. Okay. Let me jump off on one more tangent here. So, we know about the 2-hour incubation time that human vampires require, and we're reminded of it once again just before the climax, and that if they don't feed within 30 seconds of waking up as slow as hell zombie vampires, they turn to dust and literally explode in a cloud of ash. But when the two colonels run back into the madness of central London at this point in the flick, just 2 days after Miss May got loose, they're surrounded by face-melting, ravenous, pissed-off, blood-soaked human vampires who are chasing down down new victims like Usain Bolt. This completely counters everything we've learned and have had forced into our brains by the scientists in the first act about how this vampire virus works, not to mention the unanswered question of just how several million people were transformed into vampires within a half a day of the two colonels leaving town. Once again, I digress. Colonel What's-His-Face finds himself being called to Matilda again, who was laying in the basement crypt of St. Paul's Cathedral while sending up all the souls of the damned in the form of a giant blue spotlight reminiscent of the Ark of the Covenant in Raiders to her waiting spaceship. During this time, Colonel SAS finds out from the lead Space Center scientist that they can kill the main space vampires with regular iron swords plunged into their bodies just below their hearts. Like, what the fuck? Okay, and so he takes the scientist's sword, which the badass old guy had used to kill one of the main 3 space vampires, and busts ass across London on foot to the cathedral in like 3 minutes time. There, Colonel SAS dusts the second to last space vampire, super easily I might add, it was barely an inconvenience, and then throws the sword to Colonel What's-His-Face while What's-His-Face is boning Matilda in the middle of the column of blue human soul lights getting beamed up to the vampire spaceship, and What's-His-Face shoves the sword straight through Miss May and himself while he orgasms or some shit. Matilda doesn't die though. Why? And she and Colonel What's-His-Face then get transported up to the waiting spaceship, and then the spaceship goes back to Halley's Comet. The end. I have no fucking clue what to make of this movie, other than the fact that everybody working on it was either high or mentally handicapped, or both. Like I said, it was directed by the guy who made the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and who kinda co-directed Poltergeist. Sure, but it is a pretty far cry from those 2 classic horror films. Nothing in Lifeforce makes any kind of sense, even in the loosest movie storytelling logic possible. Rules that are set up very specifically in the first half of the movie are completely ignored in the second half for no reason that I can fathom. For example, the 2-hour vampire rule. Why make it 2 hours to transform a person into a soul-sucking vampire who can barely move and who blows up into a dust pinata if somebody sneezes at him after he's resurrected for 30 seconds, if the entire finale requires fast-moving, bloody, and not dried out and violent vampires? Why not just make them violent and fast and bloody from the beginning? It's called continuity, people. And then there's the drop-off in urgency in the plot. At first, the scientist and the Colonel SAS guy are raring to go and tracking down Miss May after she escaped into the night, not knowing how many other people she may have infected with the vampirus. But then they wait more than half a day for Colonel What's-His-Name to come to them to answer a few questions that they easily could have done over the phone. Then when he's there and has some terrible nightmares concerning Miss May, and he claims that they now have a psychic bond, instead of putting him to hypnosis immediately to find out if they can see where the vampire is located, the doctor on duty says, "Not now. He's too exhausted." To which the lead scientist guy shrugs his shoulders and says, "Man, okay, we'll wait until he gets a good nighty night's sleep, and we'll do it after breakfast tomorrow." Also, and this is a huge pet peeve of mine, the main characters in this thing do the dumbest things ever just to move the plot forward. Despite being high-ranking soldiers and scientists, people I typically consider to be intelligent. I'm not talking about when people are put under the space vampire's gazes and do the creature's biddings. That's understandable, but how these intellectuals react to things and how they make all these ridiculous harebrained plans, it's just so brain-scratchingly dumb. There's one scene in particular where Matilda just attacks and tosses security guards around as she slowly, so slowly, walks out of the Space Center complex, still naked as a jaybird, and the remaining guards and scientists just watch her walk off into the night. Nobody tries to shoot her in the back of the head or anything. She's right there. It takes her several minutes to get enveloped in the darkness, and even then, she's walking in a straight line. Follow her from a distance, throw a grenade. That at least would have killed her for a while and given those people who know what's going on time to combat it. The last thing that I want to mention about Lifeforce is how unintentionally goofy it is. It tries to take itself super seriously, but then it will have a scene where the astronauts who first board the alien spacecraft float around in 0G for 3 minutes, just staring at the naked Miss May and making horny comments about her. Then there's a scene where Colonel What's-His-Face slaps that poor woman around after warning his partner that she likes it. She's just a masochist. And then there's the part where on the way back from the comet, the space shuttle crew is getting their life forces drained from the vampires one at a time, but the remaining crew members never think to just jettison the 3 alien bodies that they picked up in the strange spacecraft filled with giant bat-like creatures. Colonel What's-His-Face has enough sense to try and burn the space shuttle before Earth can be infected by the problem they brought back with them, but they never thought to get rid of those creepy, sleepy humanoids before it came to that? There are dozens of scenes and plot points like this peppered throughout the movie. It's just nuts. So in hindsight, younger me was apparently very easily entertained. I recall watching things like RoboCop, Nightmare on Elm Street, and the Halloween movies by the time I had seen Lifeforce, so I can't claim that this was a unique experience for me. Watching grotesque violence and female nudity, that is. I don't know what to say, except that adult me is kinda disappointed here. I expected so much more from younger me's taste in movies. This doesn't bode well for other flicks I was planning to revisit in the future. Nah, oh well. I was misremembering, and in the end, I find that I have to give Lifeforce a D-. It was a figurative Cleveland steamer all over the viewer. It had a stupid plot, stupid characters, and a really stupid finale, and it had no real scares at all for a sci-fi horror movie. The only good things I'll say about it were Matilda May's absolutely perfect naked body being on display in almost every scene she's in, as well as the kind of creepy moving dried up human shells after they get their life force drained. Creepy, yes, but just not scary. Skip it. And if you've already seen it and remember it fondly for some reason, do not watch it again. Just hold on to those rose-tinted memories. Oh, and one more thing. In the movie, Halley's Comet is huge and lights up the night sky, when in reality, it was kind of a letdown. I remember that you could see it in the night, but it was nothing like the Hale-Bopp comet that came near Earth in '97. But that has nothing to do with anything. Colin Wilson, the original novel's author, was also pretty pissed off with the way the film turned out. He once wrote, "British author John Fowles had once told me that the film of the Magus, a movie based on one of Fowles' books, was the worst movie ever made. After seeing Lifeforce, I sent him a postcard telling him that I had gone one better." Damn. Good night.